You've watched this before. You know how it ends. You know which scene is coming. You know exactly what's going to happen. And yet, you're watching it again. Not because you forgot, but because you remember. And that detail matters more than people think. When people talk about rewatching shows or movies, they usually frame it as a habit, or boredom, or nostalgia. But psychology sees something else. Rewatching isn't about the content. It's about regulation. Every day, your brain is under pressure. New information, new expectations, new social signals to read, new decisions you didn't ask to make. Your nervous system spends most of its time anticipating what comes next. And anticipation is expensive. It costs energy, attention, emotional readiness. So when you sit down and press play on something familiar, your brain shifts gears. Psychologists call this cognitive relief. Because familiar stories require less prediction. No scanning for danger, no trying to understand new characters, no emotional surprises waiting around the corner. Your brain already knows the terrain. And because of that, it can finally lower its guard. This is one of the core psychological reasons people rewatch the same things. Not because they're avoiding life, but because they're overloaded by it. There's another mechanism at work here. It's called emotional regulation. When life feels unpredictable, the mind searches for patterns it can trust. Familiar stories offer something rare, a guaranteed emotional outcome. You already know how this ends. You already know who survives. You already know the conflict resolves. That certainty matters, especially to people who are sensitive to chaos, overstimulation, or emotional volatility. Rewatching becomes a way to stabilize the nervous system, a way to feel safe without having to explain why. But here's where it gets more personal. You're not just rewatching a story. You're reconnecting with a version of yourself, the person you were when you first watched it, the emotional state you were in, the phase of life it belonged to, the quiet moments it kept you company. Psychologically, this works because memory isn't just stored in the mind. It's stored in the body. Familiar scenes trigger familiar states. The same pacing, the same tone, the same emotional rhythm. Your body recognizes it before your thoughts do. That's why rewatching feels comforting in a way new things don't. New content puts your brain into discovery mode. It has to track, predict, evaluate. But rewatching puts your brain into savoring mode. You're no longer chasing the plot. You're noticing details, subtle expressions, background moments, meaning that only appears once the pressure to keep up is gone. This is why rewatching doesn't mean you're stuck. It often means you're going deeper. There's also a social layer to this. Psychology refers to it as parasocial familiarity. The characters in stories you rewatch become predictable presences. You know how they speak, how they react, what they would do in certain situations. They don't surprise you. They don't abandon you. They don't change without warning. For people who find real-world relationships emotionally demanding or unpredictable, this consistency feels grounding. Not because they're replacing real connection, but because they're recovering from it. And then there's decision fatigue. By the end of the day, you've made thousands of choices. What to respond to, what to ignore, what to hold together. Choosing something new is another decision, another risk. Rewatching removes that burden. No uncertainty, no investment anxiety, no fear of disappointment. Just something you already trust. This is why people who rewatch aren't lazy. They're often mentally exhausted. They understand intuitively. That rest doesn't always look like sleep. Sometimes rest looks like something familiar playing quietly in the background, something that doesn't demand anything from you. So when someone says, "I don't get why you keep watching the same thing," what they're really saying is they don't understand how your mind works. Because the psychology of people who rewatch isn't about clinging to the past. It's about self-stabilization. It's about finding safety in a world that rarely offers it. It's about giving the brain permission to stop scanning, predicting, and bracing. And in that sense, rewatching isn't a flaw. It's an intelligent response to overstimulation, a quiet form of self-care. So if you rewatch the same shows or movies again and again, you're not stuck. You're not boring. You're regulating. You're resting. You're choosing familiarity when novelty feels too loud. And that choice makes more psychological sense than most people realize. If this resonated with you, you're not alone. And if you find comfort in the familiar, you already understand the psychology behind it, even if you never needed to name it.